I sat in that mahogany-lined law office, watching my daughter-in-law Jessica practically dance around the conference table, her voice echoing off the walls as she announced her victory to everyone present. "My mother-in-law left us the 4 Miami beach houses. Ella, too bad you only got that old shed in Mississippi." The room erupted in applause from Jessica's family members, who had somehow managed to attend this supposedly private meeting. My poor daughter Ella sat there with tears threatening to spill, while my son Bradley wore that satisfied smirk I'd grown to despise. I just smiled calmly and said the words that would change everything. "Son, you really don't know, do you?" Jessica froze immediately, her celebration dying in her throat as she screamed, "Know what? 6 months earlier, life seemed so much simpler. I thought I understood my family, thought I knew the people I'd raised and loved. My late husband Robert had left me comfortable in our modest home in suburban Atlanta, not wealthy by any means, but secure enough to enjoy my retirement years. I had my 2 children, Bradley, 34, who worked as an accountant, and my sweet Ella, 31, a struggling watercolor artist trying to make ends meet while raising her twin boys after a difficult divorce. Everything changed when Bradley brought Jessica home 3 years ago. She was 29, a real estate agent with perfectly styled blonde hair and an infectious smile that could charm anyone within minutes. At first, I was genuinely happy for my son. After his own painful divorce 5 years earlier, he deserved love and companionship. Jessica seemed perfect for him, attentive, caring, and genuinely interested in our family. But I started noticing things. Small things at first. The way Jessica's eyes would light up whenever someone mentioned property values or investments. How she'd casually steer conversations toward financial topics during family dinners. She had an uncanny ability to remember every detail about who owned what, who had money, and who didn't. My mother-in-law, Margaret, Robert's mother, was 86 and still sharp as a tack, living independently in her beautiful home in Coral Gables. She owned 4 rental properties in Miami Beach that her late husband had purchased back in the 1970s, plus a small property in rural Mississippi that had been in their family for generations. Margaret had always been fond of both my children, but she had a special soft spot for Ella, probably because they both shared that artistic temperament. The Sunday dinners at my house became a weekly theater production once Jessica entered our lives. She'd arrive early to help me cook, always bringing some expensive wine or gourmet dessert, making sure everyone noticed her generosity. During these meals, she'd pepper Margaret with questions about her health, her properties, her plans for the future, all under the guise of caring concern. "Margaret, you really should think about getting help with maintaining those Miami properties," Jessica would say, her voice dripping with false concern. "The rental market is so complicated these days. You need someone with real estate experience to help you manage everything." Bradley would nod enthusiastically, completely under her spell. "Mom's right, Grandma. Jessica knows all about property management. She could help you maximize your income." Meanwhile, Ella would sit quietly with her boys, 7-year-old twins named Jake and Sam, trying to keep them entertained while the adults talked. Jessica never directly excluded Ella from these conversations, but she had a way of making comments that highlighted the difference in their circumstances. "Ella, honey, how's the art business? I imagine it must be so difficult to plan for the future when income is so unpredictable," Jessica would say, with that sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I always tell Bradley how lucky we are to have stable careers. Security is so important, especially when you're thinking about family legacy and inheritance planning." I watched my daughter's face flush with embarrassment during these exchanges, and I started to see a pattern emerging. Jessica wasn't just making conversation, she was building a narrative, painting herself and Bradley as the responsible, financially stable couple, while subtly undermining Ella's position in the family. The breaking point came during Margaret's 86th birthday celebration. Jessica had insisted on planning the entire party, claiming she wanted to give Margaret the celebration she deserved. She rented a private dining room at an upscale restaurant, invited extended family members, and even hired a photographer to capture the memories. During the dinner, Jessica stood up to make a toast. "Margaret, you've been such an inspiration to all of us. Your wisdom, your strength, your incredible business sense in building such a wonderful property portfolio. I just want you to know that Bradley and I are committed to honoring your legacy and making sure everything you've worked for continues to thrive for future generations." The applause was thunderous, and I watched Margaret's face beam with pride. But I also noticed something else. Jessica had positioned herself as the heir apparent, the responsible granddaughter-in-law who would carry on Margaret's work. She had done it so smoothly, so naturally, that most people probably didn't even realize what had just happened. That night, after everyone had gone home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just witnessed something calculated and deliberate. Jessica wasn't just being a loving family member. She was campaigning for Margaret's inheritance, and she was doing it with the skill of a professional politician. The twist that sent chills down my spine came 2 weeks later when I discovered that Jessica had been meeting privately with Margaret's longtime attorney, Daniel Hutchinson. I found out by accident when I called his office to schedule an appointment for Margaret regarding a minor legal matter, only to be told that Jessica had just left from a meeting where she'd identified herself as Margaret's family representative. When I confronted Bradley about this, he became defensive and angry. "Jessica is just trying to help Mom. Grandma is getting older, and someone needs to make sure her affairs are in order. Jessica understands real estate and legal matters better than the rest of us." But I knew better. Jessica wasn't helping Margaret. She was positioning herself to control Margaret's decisions, and my son was either too blind to see it or too greedy to care. Either way, I realized our family was in serious trouble, and I was the only one who could see what was really happening. 4 months before that devastating inheritance meeting, I decided I couldn't sit back and watch Jessica destroy our family any longer. I started paying closer attention to her behavior, and what I discovered made my blood run cold. Jessica had been systematically poisoning Margaret's opinion of Ella. During their private conversations, which I learned about through Margaret's housekeeper Rosa, Jessica would share concerns about Ella's financial responsibility. She'd mention Ella's credit card debt from her divorce, her irregular income, her inability to provide stability for the twins. "I'm just worried that if Ella inherited anything significant, she might not know how to handle it responsibly," Jessica told Margaret during one of her weekly visits. "You know how artists are. They're wonderful people, but they're not practical about money. Bradley and I have been trying to help her budget, but she gets so emotional about financial discussions." These weren't outright lies, but they were twisted versions of truth designed to plant seeds of doubt. Yes, Ella had struggled financially after her divorce. Yes, she sometimes made impulsive purchases when she was stressed. But she was also a devoted mother, working multiple jobs to support her children while pursuing her passion for art. Jessica conveniently omitted those details. I decided to do some investigating of my own. I started by calling Daniel Hutchinson's office, claiming I was concerned about Margaret's legal affairs and wanted to understand what documents Jessica had been discussing with him. His secretary, thinking I was just another worried family member, let slip that Jessica had brought copies of Ella's financial records to their meetings, including credit reports and bank statements. The violation of privacy was staggering, but even worse was the realization that Jessica had somehow obtained these private documents without Ella's knowledge or consent. When I confronted Jessica about this, she had the audacity to claim she was protecting the family's interests. "Carmen, I know you love Ella, but someone has to think practically here," Jessica said, her voice taking on a patronizing tone I'd never heard before. "Margaret is getting older, and she needs to make smart decisions about her estate. Would you really want to see those beautiful Miami properties sold off to pay Ella's debts?" The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. Jessica was using genuine family love and concern as weapons to achieve her own goals. She was turning Margaret's natural desire to protect the family legacy into a tool for excluding Ella from that legacy. But Jessica's campaign went beyond just financial concerns. She began orchestrating situations where Ella would appear irresponsible or unreliable. She'd invite Margaret to family events but forget to tell Ella about them, then express disappointment that Ella hadn't shown up. She'd schedule important family discussions during times when Ella was working or caring for her children, then suggest that Ella's absence showed a lack of commitment to family matters. The most devastating incident occurred during Margaret's brief hospitalization for a minor procedure. Jessica made sure she was the first person Margaret saw when she woke up, armed with flowers, magazines, and an endless stream of cheerful conversation. When Ella arrived later that day, after arranging childcare and rushing from work, Jessica made a point of telling Margaret how lucky she was that someone had been there all day to keep her company. Margaret, groggy from medication and naturally grateful to Jessica for her attention, didn't realize she was being manipulated into making comparisons between her granddaughters-in-law. From Margaret's perspective, Jessica was the devoted family member who dropped everything to be at her side, while Ella was the one who showed up hours later with excuses about work and children. I tried to defend Ella during these incidents, but Jessica had positioned herself so skillfully that any criticism of her behavior made me appear jealous or unreasonable. When I pointed out that Ella had work commitments and childcare responsibilities, Jessica would nod sympathetically and say something like, "Of course. And we all understand how hard it is for single mothers. That's exactly why Ella needs to focus on her immediate responsibilities rather than worrying about family business matters." The situation reached a crisis point when I discovered that Jessica had been researching the Miami properties extensively. She'd obtained detailed appraisals, rental income reports, and market analyses. She knew exactly what those properties were worth, down to the last dollar. She'd even started making plans for improving them, including renovation projects that would increase their rental value. During one particularly painful family dinner, Jessica spread out photographs and rental listings on my dining room table, pointing out the property's potential with the enthusiasm of someone planning her own future. "Look at this, Margaret. With just a little updating, we could increase the rental income on the Ocean Drive property by at least 30%. Bradley and I have been looking at similar renovations in South Beach, and the return on investment is incredible." Bradley hung on every word, completely enchanted by visions of wealth and success. Margaret seemed pleased by Jessica's interest and expertise, but I watched Ella's face crumble as she realized she was being systematically written out of her own family's future. That night, after everyone had left, I found Ella crying in my kitchen. "Mom, I don't understand what's happening," she whispered. "I feel like I'm losing Grandma Margaret, losing Bradley, losing everything. Jessica makes me feel like such a failure, like I don't deserve to be part of this family." The twist that made everything crystal clear came when I decided to hire a private investigator to look into Jessica's background. What I discovered shattered any remaining illusions about her true character. Jessica had done this before. In her previous long-term relationship, she'd manipulated her way into a wealthy boyfriend's family, convincing his elderly grandmother to change her will in Jessica's favor. When the grandmother died and left Jessica a substantial inheritance, Jessica promptly broke up with the boyfriend and disappeared with the money. The pattern was identical. The charm offensive, the systematic undermining of other family members, the positioning of herself as the responsible caretaker, and the ultimate betrayal. Jessica wasn't just a gold digger. She was a professional manipulator who targeted vulnerable elderly people and the families who loved them. I realized I was watching my own family fall victim to a predator, and my son Bradley was either too blind or too greedy to see what was happening. But I also realized something else. Jessica's overconfidence might just be her downfall. She was so focused on the Miami properties, so certain of their value and her right to them, that she wasn't paying attention to other possibilities. If I was going to protect my family, I needed to be just as strategic as Jessica, but smarter. 2 months before the inheritance meeting, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to beat Jessica at her own game, but I needed help. That's when I decided to contact my own attorney, Patricia Coleman, someone I'd known since college, who now specialized in estate planning and elder law. Patricia listened to my story with growing concern and professional interest. "Carmen, what you're describing sounds like a textbook case of undue influence," she said during our confidential meeting. "If Jessica is manipulating Margaret's decisions about her estate, there could be grounds for legal action. But we need evidence, and we need to be very careful about how we proceed." I also hired a private investigator named Michael Torres, a former detective who specialized in family fraud cases. Michael's first assignment was to dig deeper into those Miami properties that Jessica was so excited about inheriting. What he discovered was absolutely shocking. The 4 Miami Beach properties that looked so impressive on paper were actually financial disasters waiting to happen. Margaret's late husband had made some questionable deals back in the 1980s, using the properties as collateral for various business ventures that had gone bad. The properties were encumbered with liens totaling over $800,000. Environmental compliance issues that would cost hundreds of thousands more to address, and structural problems that had been covered up rather than properly repaired. The Ocean Drive property that Jessica was so excited about had foundation issues related to rising sea levels and saltwater intrusion. The repair estimates started at $250,000, and that was just for the foundation. The roof, plumbing, and electrical systems all needed complete replacement. The Collins Avenue property had been built with materials containing asbestos and lead paint. Any renovation work would require full environmental remediation, which could cost upward of $300,000 before any actual improvements could begin. The Washington Avenue property sat on contaminated soil from a former gas station that had operated on the site decades earlier. The environmental liability alone could reach into the millions if the EPA decided to require full cleanup. The 4th property on Lincoln Road had rent control issues and long-term tenants with ironclad leases that prevented any significant rent increases for the next 12 years. The rental income barely covered the property taxes and insurance, let alone maintenance and improvements. In other words, the Miami properties that Jessica was so desperately plotting to inherit were not assets. They were liabilities that would drain hundreds of thousands of dollars from whoever was unlucky enough to own them. Margaret's late husband had hidden these problems carefully, maintaining the property's appearance of value while keeping the real financial situation buried in complex legal documents and shell companies. But Michael's investigation revealed something even more shocking. Jessica wasn't just ignorant of these problems. She was actively hiding them. She had obtained preliminary reports about the property's conditions and had deliberately withheld this information from Margaret, Bradley, and the rest of the family. She was planning to inherit the properties, then immediately declare bankruptcy to escape the liabilities, keeping any liquid assets that came with the inheritance while dumping the property problems on the estate or insurance companies. The cynical calculation was breathtaking. Jessica was planning to defraud not just my family, but also Margaret's insurance companies and possibly federal environmental agencies. She was willing to destroy lives and break laws to enrich herself. Meanwhile, I asked Michael to investigate the Mississippi property that everyone considered worthless. The shed that Jessica and Bradley loved to mock was actually a small cabin sitting on 47 acres of rural land about an hour outside of Jackson. Margaret's family had owned the property for over a century, using it as a hunting lodge and family retreat. What Michael discovered about the Mississippi property left me speechless. Recent geological surveys of the area had revealed significant mineral deposits beneath the land, including a substantial natural gas reserve and potentially valuable rare earth minerals. Even more importantly, the property sat directly above a newly discovered oil field that geologists estimated could produce millions of barrels over the next 20 years. The Mississippi property that Jessica dismissed as worthless was actually worth somewhere between $15 and $30 million, depending on extraction costs and market conditions. Several major energy companies had been quietly buying up mineral rights in the area, and at least 3 of them had made preliminary inquiries about Margaret's property. But here was the most incredible part. Margaret knew about the oil discovery. She'd been contacted by energy companies months ago and had quietly hired her own geological consultants to assess the property's value. She'd been sitting on this information, watching Jessica's manipulation campaign unfold while planning her own response. Margaret wasn't the confused, vulnerable elderly woman that Jessica thought she was manipulating. She was a sharp, angry grandmother who was about to teach a gold digger the most expensive lesson of her life. The final piece of the puzzle came when Patricia helped me understand the legal implications of Jessica's behavior. By manipulating Margaret's decisions through deception and fraudulent information, Jessica had potentially committed several crimes, including elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. If we could document her actions properly, she wouldn't just lose the inheritance. She could face criminal charges that would destroy her career and possibly send her to prison. But we needed to be careful. If we moved too quickly or revealed our knowledge too early, Jessica might find ways to cover her tracks or manipulate the situation further. We needed to let her think she was winning right up until the moment we destroyed her completely. That's when I made the decision to approach Margaret directly. I needed to know how much she understood about what was happening, and I needed to find out if she was willing to work with me to expose Jessica's true nature. The conversation I had with Margaret that evening changed everything. Sitting in her beautiful Coral Gables living room, surrounded by family photographs and mementos from 8 decades of life, Margaret looked me straight in the eye and said words I'll never forget. "Carmen, dear, I've been waiting for you to figure this out. That woman has been playing games with my family for months, and I've been documenting every lie she's told me. I may be 86 years old, but I'm not stupid, and I'm certainly not helpless. It's time to remind young Jessica that she's not the only one who knows how to plan a strategy." The twist that solidified everything was Margaret's revelation that she'd been secretly recording her conversations with Jessica for weeks, using a small device that her late husband had given her years ago for recording important business meetings. We had Jessica's manipulation attempts documented in her own voice, and we had the legal grounds to prove that she'd been systematically defrauding an elderly family member. Jessica thought she was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. But she didn't realize that Margaret and I had been playing 3-dimensional chess all along, and we were about to checkmate her completely. 1 month before the inheritance meeting, Margaret and I began meeting secretly to plan our counterattack against Jessica's manipulation campaign. These weren't the casual family visits that everyone was used to seeing. These were strategic planning sessions, where we carefully orchestrated every detail of what would become Jessica's downfall. Margaret's house became our command center. Every Tuesday morning, when Jessica thought Margaret was at her weekly doctor's appointment, Margaret and I would spread legal documents, investigation reports, and audio recordings across her dining room table, like generals planning a military campaign. "You know, Carmen," Margaret said during one of these meetings, "I've been dealing with manipulative people my entire life. When you've been married to a businessman for 53 years, you learn to recognize when someone is trying to con you." Jessica's mistake was thinking that age equals stupidity. Margaret's mental sharpness was remarkable. She had perfect recall of every conversation she'd had with Jessica, every promise Jessica had made, every lie Jessica had told. More importantly, she had been testing Jessica's character for months, creating situations that revealed Jessica's true motivations. I started suspecting something was wrong when Jessica began asking so many detailed questions about my will and estate planning, Margaret explained. Then she started bringing up Ella's financial problems during every conversation, always with this fake concern that was supposed to make me worry about leaving Ella any significant inheritance. Margaret revealed that she'd been conducting her own investigation into Jessica's background, using her connections from decades of social and business relationships in Miami. What she'd discovered matched my private investigator's findings perfectly. Jessica had a pattern of targeting elderly people with significant assets, manipulating their families, and walking away with substantial inheritances. The breaking point for me was when Jessica brought those forged financial documents to Daniel Hutchinson's office. Margaret continued. She'd somehow obtained real bank statements and credit reports for Ella, but she'd altered some of the numbers to make Ella's financial situation look worse than it actually was. When Daniel showed me those documents, I knew we were dealing with someone who was willing to commit fraud to get what she wanted. Our plan was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its execution. We would let Jessica continue believing that she was successfully manipulating the inheritance situation, while we secretly arranged for the truth to be revealed in the most public and humiliating way possible. The first step was to ensure that the real inheritance documents were properly executed and legally protected. Margaret worked with a different attorney, someone Jessica didn't know about, to create an ironclad will that would withstand any legal challenges. The will specifically documented Jessica's manipulative behavior and explained why certain decisions were being made. The second step was to gather irrefutable evidence of Jessica's fraud and manipulation. Margaret continued her recording sessions, capturing Jessica's lies about Ella's finances, her false claims about the Miami property's value, and her efforts to isolate Ella from family decisions. These recordings would not only protect the inheritance decisions, but could also be used in criminal proceedings if necessary. The third step was the most emotionally difficult part of our plan. We had to let Jessica continue hurting Ella and manipulating Bradley while we gathered evidence and prepared our response. Watching my daughter suffer through Jessica's psychological abuse was heartbreaking, but we knew that intervening too early would only give Jessica the chance to adjust her strategy. Margaret shared something with me during one of our planning sessions that broke my heart and strengthened my resolve simultaneously. "Carmen, I've been watching Bradley change over these past months, and it terrifies me. He's becoming someone I don't recognize, someone who's willing to sacrifice his sister's well-being for the promise of easy money. Jessica hasn't just targeted my estate. She's corrupted my grandson's character." We decided that Bradley needed to face consequences for his complicity in Jessica's scheme. He wasn't an innocent victim. He was an active participant who had chosen greed over family loyalty. The inheritance arrangements would reflect that reality. Margaret revealed the details of her real estate holdings that nobody else in the family knew about. In addition to the problematic Miami properties and the valuable Mississippi land, she owned mineral rights in West Texas, a small apartment building in downtown Atlanta, and several commercial properties in Orlando that generated steady rental income. Her total estate was worth significantly more than anyone realized, but it was also structured in ways that would protect it from people like Jessica. The Mississippi property was the centerpiece of our strategy. The geological surveys had confirmed substantial oil reserves, and 3 major energy companies had made formal offers to purchase the mineral rights. The property that Jessica dismissed as worthless was actually the most valuable single asset in Margaret's entire estate. "I'm going to leave that property to Ella," Margaret explained, "not just because she deserves it, but because I want everyone to understand the difference between real value and artificial value. Jessica is so focused on the appearance of wealth that she can't see actual worth when it's right in front of her." We also discussed the Miami properties and their hidden liabilities. Margaret had known about the environmental problems, structural issues, and financial encumbrances for years. Her late husband had tried to hide these problems from her, but Margaret had discovered the truth after his death, when she'd had independent assessments done. "I'm leaving those properties to Jessica and Bradley as a lesson," Margaret said with a grim smile. "They want my real estate so badly. They can have it. All of it. Including the $1 million in environmental cleanup costs and the $800,000 in liens. Sometimes the best way to punish greed is to give greedy people exactly what they think they want." The psychological complexity of Margaret's plan was brilliant. Jessica would get everything she'd been scheming to obtain, and it would financially destroy her. Bradley would learn that his willingness to betray his sister had earned him a partnership in a financial disaster. Ella would inherit the one asset that everyone else had dismissed, and it would set her up for life. But Margaret wasn't finished. She wanted to make sure that Jessica's crimes were exposed publicly, that Ella received an apology from the family members who had doubted her, and that Bradley faced real consequences for his choices. "I'm planning to include video recordings in my will," Margaret explained. "I want to leave messages for each member of the family explaining exactly what I observed, why I made certain decisions, and what I hope they'll learn from this experience. Jessica isn't going to be able to claim ignorance or play the victim when my own voice is explaining her behavior to a room full of lawyers and family members. The emotional moment when Margaret broke down and cried was something I'll never forget. Carmen, I'm 86 years old. I don't have many years left, and I want to spend them knowing that I protected the people I love from someone who would have destroyed them. Jessica didn't just try to steal money from our family. She tried to steal our love, our trust, our relationships with each other. That's unforgivable. Our secret alliance was built on love, justice, and a shared determination to protect Ella from a predator who had already done too much damage. But it was also built on the painful recognition that sometimes families have to face hard truths about themselves in order to heal. The twist that made our plan even more devastating was Margaret's discovery that Jessica had been secretly consulting divorce attorneys about protecting assets in case her marriage to Bradley didn't work out. Jessica wasn't just planning to steal the family inheritance. She was planning to divorce Bradley after Shed secured the money, keeping everything for herself while leaving him with nothing but debt and shame. This revelation convinced Margaret that Jessica was even more dangerous than Wed initially realized. She wasn't just a gold digger. She was someone who viewed love, family, and human relationships as tools to be used and discarded when they were no longer useful. Our plan was no longer just about protecting an inheritance or teaching someone a lesson. It was about saving my family from complete destruction and making sure that a professional manipulator faced consequences that would prevent her from hurting other families in the future. The day of the inheritance meeting arrived with all the tension of a courtroom drama. Though most of the participants didn't realize they were about to witness one of the most spectacular reversals in family history. Daniel Hutchinson's law office conference room had been arranged to accommodate what Jessica had insisted should be a celebration of Margaret's generous legacy. Jessica arrived dressed like she was attending a wedding, wearing a navy blue designer dress and pearls that probably cost more than Ella spent on groceries in 3 months. Shed brought her parents, her sister, and even her best friend Sarah, claiming that family support was important during these emotional times. What she really wanted was an audience for her triumph. Bradley sat beside Jessica, with that self-satisfied expression I'd come to despise, occasionally reaching over to squeeze her hand in solidarity. They looked like a power couple, preparing to accept an award, not family members attending a legal proceeding about their grandmother's final wishes. Ella sat quietly in the corner with her twins, looking like she wanted to disappear. Shed dressed simply in a black skirt and white blouse. Her only jewelry the small cross necklace that had belonged to her late father. Her boys, Jake and Sam, fidgeted in their chairs, not understanding why they had to attend this grown-up meeting, but sensing the tension in the room. Margaret had insisted on attending the reading despite her age and recent health concerns. She sat at the head of the long conference table in her wheelchair, wearing the emerald green dress that had always been her favorite. Her white hair perfectly styled, and her eyes sharp with anticipation. Anyone who looked carefully would have noticed the small recording device clipped to her collar, though Jessica was too excited to pay attention to such details. Daniel Hutchinson cleared his throat and began the formal reading, his voice carrying the weight of decades of legal experience. We are here today for the reading of the last will and testament of Margaret Rose Thornton, executed on March 15th of this year. Jessica's smile grew wider with each passing moment. This was her moment of vindication, her proof that months of careful manipulation had paid off exactly as Shed planned. Shed successfully positioned herself as the responsible family member deserving of Margaret's trust and generosity. To my grandson Bradley James Thornton and his wife Jessica Marie Thornton, I leave my 4 rental properties located in Miami Beach, Florida, including all furnishings, appliances, and rental agreements currently in effect. The room erupted in applause from Jessica's supporters. Jessica actually squealed with delight, jumping up to hug Bradley and then rushing over to embrace Margaret with theatrical gratitude. Thank you so much, Margaret. I promise take such good care of your beautiful properties. Honor your legacy. and make sure they continue to provide income for future generations. Jessica's voice was loud enough for everyone in the building to hear, and her joy seemed absolutely genuine. But I noticed Daniel's uncomfortable expression as he waited for the celebration to die down. He kept glancing at me with something that looked almost like sympathy, as if he knew what was coming and felt sorry for what Jessica was about to experience. To my granddaughter, Ella Marie Chen, I leave my property located in Yazoo County, Mississippi, including the cabin, all outbuildings, and 47 acres of land, along with all mineral rights and subsurface interests. Jessica's laughter was cruel and immediate. Oh, Ella, honey, I'm so sorry. You got the old hunting cabin and that little shed. But don't worry. I'm sure you can use it for art retreats or something. Maybe you can paint some nice pictures of the Mississippi countryside. The applause from Jessica's supporters was even louder this time, and I watched my daughter's face crumble with embarrassment and disappointment. Ella had known this was coming, but experiencing the public humiliation was still devastating. That's when I stood up and delivered the words that would haunt Jessica for the rest of her life. Son, you really don't know, do you? The room went silent so quickly, it felt like someone had sucked all the air out of the space. Jessica's laughter died in her throat, and her face went pale as she registered the confident calm in my voice. Know what? Bradley asked, though I could see uncertainty creeping into his expression. Jessica, I said, turning to face her directly, would you like to tell everyone about the $800,000 in liens against those beautiful Miami properties? Or should I explain the environmental cleanup costs that will run into hundreds of thousands more? Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered. But her voice had lost all its earlier confidence. Daniel Hutchinson cleared his throat and opened a thick folder of documents. Actually, Mrs. Thornton's will includes detailed financial disclosures about all properties being inherited. The Miami properties carry significant liabilities that transfer to the new owners. I pulled out my own folder of investigation reports and laid them on the conference table, where everyone could see them. The Ocean Drive property has foundation damage from saltwater intrusion. Repair estimates start at $250,000. The Collins Avenue property contains asbestos and lead paint, requiring environmental remediation, costing upward of $300,000 before any renovation work can begin. Bradley's face was turning white as the implications sank in. Mom, what are you talking about? These are valuable rental properties. The Washington Avenue property sits on contaminated soil from a former gas station. I continued relentlessly. Environmental liability could reach into the millions, and the Lincoln Road property has rent control issues that prevent any significant income increases for the next 12 years. Jessica finally found her voice, though it was shaking with panic. This is ridiculous. Margaret would have told us if there were problems with the properties. That's when Margaret spoke up from her wheelchair, her voice clear and strong despite her age. Jessica, dear, I've been documenting every lie you've told me for the past 6 months. Would you like me to play some of the recordings? The color drained completely from Jessica's face as Margaret reached for the small device clipped to her dress. You've been very creative in your efforts to manipulate my inheritance decisions. But you made one crucial mistake. You underestimated an old woman's intelligence. Daniel continued reading from the will. I want to be clear that I am leaving the Miami properties to Bradley and Jessica with full knowledge of their financial liabilities. I believe they have made their priorities clear through their actions, and they should have the opportunity to profit from their choices. The room was dead silent, except for the sound of Jessica's panicked breathing. Her supporters had stopped applauding and were looking confused and uncomfortable. Now, I said, turning to address the room, let me tell you about that worthless shed in Mississippi that everyone's been laughing about. I opened another folder and spread out geological survey reports, energy company correspondence, and mineral rights assessments across the table. The Mississippi property sits directly above recently discovered oil reserves estimated to contain millions of barrels. Current market value assessments range from $15 to $30 million. The twist that destroyed Jessica completely was when Bradley discovered her divorce consultation papers among the documents Wed gathered. Daniel read aloud from Jessica's communications with divorce attorneys about protecting assets in case the marriage ended. According to these documents, Mrs. Jessica Thornton began consulting with divorce lawyers 3 weeks ago about strategies for keeping inherited assets separate from marital property in case of future dissolution of marriage. Bradley's face went from white to red to purple as he realized that Jessica had been planning to divorce him and keep the inheritance money for herself. "You were going to divorce me? After you got the inheritance?" Jessica's desperate attempt to salvage something from the disaster was pathetic to witness. "Bradley, honey, I was just getting information. I wanted to make sure we protected your grandmother's legacy, but the damage was done." Everyone in the room could see exactly what kind of person Jessica really was, and the inheritance that Shed thought would make her rich was actually going to bankrupt her. The final revelation came when Margaret requested that her video message be played for everyone in the room. As Margaret's video message began playing on Daniel Hutchinson's laptop, projected onto a small screen for everyone to see, the atmosphere in the conference room became suffocating. Margaret's recorded voice was clear and strong, her words precisely chosen to dismantle Jessica's deceptions, piece by piece. "If you are watching this video, it means my will has been read, and Jessica has received exactly what she thought she wanted," Margaret began, looking directly into the camera with the steely determination it'd come to admire. "Jessica, you spent months trying to convince me that you were a loving granddaughter-in-law while systematically attempting to rob my granddaughter Ella of her rightful inheritance." Jessica slumped in her chair as if someone had physically struck her. Her earlier confidence and celebration had completely evaporated, replaced by the dawning horror of someone who realizes their carefully laid plans have backfired spectacularly. "I have recordings of you lying about Ella's financial situation, falsifying documents to make her appear irresponsible, and manipulating family events to exclude her from important decisions," Margaret continued. "You underestimated my intelligence and overestimated your own cleverness." The video showed Margaret in her study at home, surrounded by the family photographs and mementos that Jessica had dismissed as sentimental clutter. But now those same family photos served as a backdrop for Margaret's devastating exposé of Jessica's true character. Bradley was staring at the screen in shock, finally seeing the grandmother he thought he knew, revealing knowledge and awareness that completely contradicted everything Jessica had told him about Margaret's mental state. "Bradley, my dear grandson, you disappoint me more than I can express," Margaret's recorded voice continued. "You allowed yourself to be manipulated by someone who never loved you, only saw you as a means to an end. Your willingness to sacrifice your sister's well-being for the promise of easy money has shown me a side of your character that breaks my heart." The cruel irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Jessica had spent months convinced that she was manipulating a confused elderly woman, when in reality, Margaret had been conducting a sophisticated counterintelligence operation that would have impressed professional investigators. Daniel Hutchinson paused the video to address the immediate legal implications. "Mrs. Thornton, I need to inform you that several of your actions over the past few months may constitute criminal fraud. The falsified financial documents you provided about Ella's credit history alone could result in federal charges." Jessica's attempt to deny everything was pathetic and desperate. "I never falsified anything. I was just trying to help the family make informed decisions. That's when I opened my final folder and spread out the evidence that would destroy any remaining credibility Jessica thought she might have. Bank records showing her secret accounts, correspondence with divorce attorneys, and most damning of all, records of similar inheritance scams Shed attempted with previous boyfriends." "Jessica," I said calmly, "we know about the Hendricks family in Tampa. We know about the elderly widow in Fort Lauderdale, whose son you dated for 2 years, while you systematically isolated her from her other children. We know this isn't the first time you've targeted a vulnerable family for financial gain." The room erupted in gasps and shocked conversations as Jessica's supporters finally understood what kind of person they'd been applauding. Her own sister looked horrified. Her parents seemed ready to disown her. and her best friend Sarah was already moving toward the door, as if she wanted to escape any association with the unfolding scandal. Bradley's confrontation with Jessica was painful to witness, even knowing how much he deserved the pain he was feeling. "Everything you told me about Grandma being confused was a lie. Everything you said about Ella being irresponsible was manipulation. You've been planning to divorce me and steal the inheritance." Jessica's final desperate attempt to salvage something from the disaster involved throwing Bradley under the bus. "I wasn't the only one who wanted those properties. Bradley knew exactly what we were doing. He was happy to see Ella get cut out of the inheritance, as long as we benefited." The accusation was probably true, but it only served to highlight how thoroughly Jessica had corrupted Bradley's judgment and character. Had allowed greed to override his love for his sister, and now he was facing the consequences of that choice. The legal implications were staggering as Daniel outlined the potential charges Jessica could face: elder abuse, fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and possibly RICO violations if prosecutors decided her pattern of inheritance scams constituted organized criminal activity. The Miami properties she'd been so excited to inherit came with liabilities that would bankrupt her, and now she faced the additional prospect of criminal prosecution and civil lawsuits. Margaret's video message concluded with a statement that left everyone in the room speechless. "I am donating all proceeds from the sale of my other properties to establish a foundation that will help elderly people protect themselves from financial predators like Jessica. If any good can come from this painful situation, it will be preventing other families from experiencing the betrayal and heartbreak that Jessica brought to ours." Ella's reaction to learning about the Mississippi property's true value was beautiful and heartbreaking simultaneously. She cried with relief, gratitude, and the overwhelming emotion of someone had been validated after months of psychological abuse. She screamed, she cried, she begged, she threatened, and she finally collapsed into a sobbing heap as the reality of her situation became undeniable. Bradley's attempt to distance himself from Jessica came too late to save his reputation or his relationship with the family. "I didn't know about the other families. I thought we were just protecting Grandma's estate from Ella's financial problems." But Margaret's video had documented Bradley's active participation in Jessica's schemes, including his knowledge of the falsified documents and his enthusiastic participation in efforts to exclude Ella from family decisions. The inheritance meeting that Jessica had planned as her moment of triumph became the most spectacular downfall I'd ever witnessed. She'd walked into that conference room thinking she was about to inherit millions of dollars and secure her future. Instead, she left in federal custody, facing criminal charges that could send her to prison for decades. 3 months after that unforgettable inheritance meeting, our family had begun the slow process of healing and rebuilding, though the landscape of our relationships had changed forever. The legal consequences of Jessica's actions had unfolded exactly as predicted, creating a cautionary tale that would be remembered in legal circles for years to come. Jessica faced federal charges in 3 states for elder abuse, inheritance fraud, and racketeering. The prosecution had built an airtight case using Margaret's recordings, the evidence I'd gathered, and testimony from victims in previous scams. Her trial was scheduled for the following spring, but her attorneys were already discussing plea bargains that would likely result in 8 to 12 years in federal prison. The Miami properties she'd been so desperate to inherit became her financial ruin as the environmental cleanup costs and outstanding liens exceeded their market value by over $1 million. The divorce proceedings between Jessica and Bradley moved quickly once the criminal charges were filed. Bradley, facing his own potential legal liability for participating in Jessica's schemes, agreed to assume full responsibility for the Miami property liabilities in exchange for Jessica's agreement not to pursue any claims against his other assets. It was a hollow victory since those assets were minimal, but it protected him from further financial disaster. Ella's transformation with her newfound security was beautiful to witness. The Mississippi property had indeed proven to be worth $23 million, as 3 energy companies entered a bidding war for the mineral rights. Ella negotiated a deal that provided her with an immediate payment of $12 million plus ongoing royalties that would generate substantial income for decades. She used part of the money to establish college funds for Jake and Sam, invested another portion in a diversified portfolio managed by a reputable financial advisor, and allocated funds to support her art career without the constant stress of financial insecurity. But perhaps more importantly, Ella used her experience to help other families recognize and defend against financial predators. She worked with Margaret's Foundation to develop educational programs that taught elderly people and their families how to identify manipulation tactics and protect themselves from inheritance scams. Her willingness to share her painful story publicly helped dozens of other families avoid similar victimization. Margaret lived to see justice served, and her family begin to heal. Though her health declined rapidly after the stress of the inheritance battle, she passed away peacefully in her sleep 4 months after the meeting, surrounded by family members who had finally learned to value love and loyalty over money and property. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives she had touched, including several elderly victims of financial scams who credited Margaret's foundation with protecting them from predators. Bradley's journey toward redemption proved more complicated and painful than anyone had anticipated. The revelation of his willingness to betray his sister for financial gain forced him to confront fundamental questions about his character and values that had been avoiding for years. He entered therapy to address his issues with greed and family loyalty, began attending support groups for people who had been manipulated by narcissistic partners, and slowly started the long process of rebuilding trust with Ella and me. His apologies to Ella were heartfelt, but insufficient to immediately repair the damage he'd helped cause. Ella graciously accepted his remorse while maintaining healthy boundaries that protected herself and her children from further manipulation. Their relationship began to heal slowly, built on honesty about past mistakes and Bradley's demonstrated commitment to changed behavior rather than empty promises. The most surprising development was Bradley's decision to use his experience to help other families recognize financial manipulation within their own relationships. He began speaking publicly about how easily he'd been deceived by Jessica's tactics, helping other people understand the warning signs of someone who views family relationships as opportunities for financial gain. My own reflection on this painful period led me to several important realizations about family dynamics and the vulnerability we all share when love is weaponized against us. Jessica's success in manipulating our family wasn't just due to her calculating nature. It was also enabled by our own assumptions about trust, loyalty, and the meaning of family support. We'd assumed that someone who claimed to love Bradley must naturally love the rest of us as well. We'd confused Jessica's knowledge about our family with genuine caring about our well-being. We'd mistaken her attention to Margaret's needs for authentic affection rather than strategic positioning. These assumptions made us vulnerable to someone who understood how to exploit our genuine love for each other. The foundation that Margaret established in her final months became a lasting legacy that helped protect hundreds of other families from similar experiences. The educational programs developed resources for recognizing financial manipulation, legal assistance for elderly victims of inheritance fraud, and support groups for family members who'd been targeted by predatory individuals. Ella's decision to become actively involved in the Foundation's work transformed her traumatic experience into a source of healing and purpose for others. She discovered that her artistic talents translated perfectly into creating educational materials that helped people understand complex emotional manipulation tactics through visual storytelling. The financial security provided by the Mississippi property inheritance allowed Ella to pursue her art career with confidence and creativity that had been impossible when she was struggling to support her children as a single mother. Her paintings began exploring themes of family loyalty, betrayal, and redemption that resonated with viewers who had experienced similar challenges in their own lives. Jake and Sam, now 8 years old, adjusted remarkably well to their changed circumstances, though they required counseling to help them understand and process the family trauma they'd witnessed. The security of their college funds and their mother's reduced stress levels provided them with stability that allowed their personalities and talents to flourish in ways that hadn't been possible during the years of financial struggle. The broader family and social consequences of Jessica's actions created ripple effects that extended far beyond our immediate family circle. Several of Jessica's previous victims came forward after her arrest, leading to additional criminal charges and civil lawsuits that ensured she would face consequences for decades of predatory behavior. Jessica's real estate license was permanently revoked, her professional relationships were destroyed, and her reputation in the Miami area was completely ruined. The local media coverage of her case became a cautionary tale that helped other families recognize similar manipulation tactics before falling victim to them. The long-term lesson that emerged from our family's ordeal was both simple and profound. Authentic love can never be purchased, manipulated, or earned through deception, but genuine family bonds can be damaged or destroyed when greed is allowed to override loyalty and compassion. Margaret's wisdom in orchestrating the inheritance trap that exposed Jessica's true nature provided our family with a painful but necessary education about the difference between genuine care and calculated manipulation. By giving Jessica exactly what she thought she wanted, Margaret demonstrated that people who are motivated primarily by greed will ultimately destroy themselves when their true priorities are revealed. The healing process for our family continued long after the legal matters were resolved, requiring ongoing efforts to rebuild trust, establish healthier communication patterns, and create new traditions based on honesty rather than assumptions about each other's motivations. Looking back on this painful chapter of our lives, I feel gratitude for Margaret's courage in protecting our family from a dangerous predator, pride in Ellis, resilience and grace throughout the ordeal, and cautious optimism about Bradley's genuine efforts to become a better person. The experience taught all of us valuable lessons about the importance of protecting vulnerable family members, recognizing manipulation tactics, and choosing loyalty over convenience when family relationships are tested. The ultimate resolution of our family crisis provided everyone involved with clarity about what really matters in life: authentic relationships built on trust and mutual respect, rather than financial arrangements based on greed and manipulation. Jessica's downfall served as a powerful reminder that people who view others as means to an end, rather than individuals deserving of love and respect, will ultimately face consequences that match the harm they've caused to others. Now, I'd love to hear from all of you who've listened to our story today. Have you ever encountered someone in your own family or social circle who seemed to be manipulating relationships for financial gain? How did you handle the situation? And what warning signs do you think other families should watch for? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video if our story helped you think about your own family relationships in a new way. Subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories about family challenges and triumphs, and please share this video with anyone who might benefit from learning about the warning signs of financial manipulation within families. Thank you for taking this journey with us, and I hope our experience helps protect your own family from those who would use love as a weapon against the people you care about most.